I'm delighted again. We've got a great panel with us this afternoon. On my left, your right, we have Kevin Ward, who is editor of the South Wales Argus, Holly Robinson, who is editor of the Western Telegraph, and Jonathan Roberts, who's editor of what is now Wales's biggest selling daily newspaper, the Evening Post in Swansea. So I'm delighted we've got a great team. We'll have the same format that we had before. We'll hear from each, interspersed with questions, and then try and pull it together at the end. And please continue to use hashtag news deficit if you want to continue to tweet the discussion. We'd be delighted if you did that. So let's get underway. And Kevin, perhaps I could ask you to start.
I just wanted to say a couple of thank yous before we start. First of all, thanks for the invitation from Rosie and for organising today, and as one of her constituents, my thoughts are with her today. Also thanks to David for stepping in so ably. I'm not sure I want to say thanks for having the classic graveyard post-lunch slot, or indeed the post-Kevin Maguire slot. But nevertheless, I'll try and keep you engaged, I hope. I have to say I wrestled for a few weeks after this invitation over what to say. And some of the points I'll make have been informed by, I thought, an excellent discussion this morning, but most represent how I felt for some time about the connection between regional media and politics. And I thought that maybe I should avoid simply giving you a list of reasons why you shouldn't shoot the messenger. But after giving the matter plenty of thought, I'm going to give you a list of reasons as to why you shouldn't shoot the messenger. But before I do that, I'm going to take the liberty of making a political, with a small p, point of my own on behalf of my industry. And before I say what I'm going to say, I absolutely accept that the regional newspaper industry has gone through some really tough times since about 2007, 2008. Some of those problems are of our own making, some of them aren't. But it's important, I think, to state, and I think Kevin Maguire touched on it before lunch, that the death of the regional newspaper industry has been greatly exaggerated. Our audience, my audience at the South Wales Argus, is bigger now than it was 5 years ago. Our print sales are down, but if you look at our combined audience, we have 350,000 people a month, different people, come to our website. We have about 25,000 people following our various Twitter feeds, and about 5,000 people liking us on Facebook. I assume that means there's tens of thousands who don't like us on Facebook. But our overall audience is bigger than it was 5 years ago. The difference is what the audience want has changed. And if you go back, I've been in this industry for nearly 30 years, since I was a 17-year-old cub reporter. And in those days, very much, you gave the readers what you thought they wanted when you decided they wanted it. And that's not where we are now. Now we've got a group of people who want news and sport and information when they want it, where they want it, in a form that they want it. And that's one of the biggest challenges that we face going forward as an industry. However, I don't know, I think we asked earlier how many AMs or politicians were in the audience. Has that changed? Nearly. And what I'm about to say, before I move on, really is a message to politicians, and particularly AMs, because so concerned have AMs been about the state of the Welsh media, and as I said, no one will deny that our industry has been through extraordinarily tough times in recent years, but so concerned have they been that there have been no fewer than 3 different Assembly inquiries into the state of the Welsh media over the last 6 or 7 years. And what's the result of those inquiries been? What sort of help has been given, in particular to the Welsh print media that our elected representatives are so concerned about? Well, the answer, I'm afraid, is absolutely nothing. There's been some proposals made about broadcasters, but almost nothing about the print media. I say almost nothing because actually there has been one proposal to come out of the Assembly in relation to the print media, actually at the same time as the last inquiry was taking place. And that proposal was to end the legal duty of public bodies to advertise their road traffic notices in local newspapers. Thankfully, as an industry, and that included the NUJ, we fought and defeated that proposal. But you very much had a situation there where, on the one hand, our politicians were preaching concern about the future of my industry, and on the other, they were making a proposal that would have put an end to one of our substantial revenue streams, and in reality, could well have put many smaller weekly newspapers out of business. And David will well know that we lobbied as an industry very hard on that. I don't think that's gone away. It'll come back again, I'm sure. Anyway, point made. Let's move on. I genuinely believe, and again, Kevin Maguire spoke about this before lunch, but I genuinely believe that in the current post-Leveson climate, it's all too easy to pin the blame for everything and anything on the media. So last year, when we had the lowest ever turnouts at the polls for the Police and Crime Commissioner elections, remember those? I don't blame you if you don't. The very first reaction from Downing Street was to blame the media for poor coverage. So ignore the fact that it was a policy that nobody wanted and even less people understood. Ignore the fact the government was so disinterested in their own policy in those elections that it spent an absolute pittance on promoting them. Blame the media. And I'm not trying to steal Jonathan's thunder here, but let's look at the measles epidemic in Swansea, a bit more up to date. What's happened there? We'll blame the Evening Post for a 20-year-old campaign. You know, let's not waste time on a proper investigation into the low MMR take-up. Let's take the easy route, which is blame the media. And we live now, I think, in a very, very black and white world, unfortunately. So if you go back to the MP's expenses scandal, the upshot of that was, well, every politician's on the make and every politician is a crook. And the upshot of phone hacking and Leveson is every journalist is a crook and is hacking phones. I give talks all the time to WI groups and that kind of thing, and in years gone by, the one question I always knew I'd get asked is, why does the print come off on your fingers? Now, the one question I always get asked is, do you hack people's phones? It's a nonsense. A small group of people on a couple of newspapers in London did it, and what they did was criminal, illegal, against the law. The Press Complaints Commission, now in its death throes, absolutely destroyed for not doing something about it. They're not the police. They couldn't do anything about it. They're a regulator. They were there to act on people's complaints. Now, if they made a mistake, it was probably that when they went to News International and said, do you hack people's phones? And they said, oh, not us, Gov. No, we don't do that. They just accepted it and they didn't refer it back to the police, which is what they should have done. But phone hacking was a failure of the law in this country. It was not a failure of press regulation. And that black and white world, you know, means that we are in the situation where my industry is being, I think, apart from a few cases, really unfairly treated at the moment. The democratic deficit in Wales, I believe, is no better or worse than other parts of the UK. I think it's fuelled in general by a public that's sceptical and distrustful, not so much of politics, but of politicians and the political system. And I have to say that much of the blame for that lies fairly and squarely with politicians. I've got a view that people are absolutely bored to tears with Punch and Judy politics. They're bored with political parties that to them all look and sound the same, with the difference in policies often no more than the width of a piece of tissue paper. But the interesting thing is, people are interested in politics. If you ask people, are you interested in politics, they'll say no, and they'll trot out all the same stuff about, oh, they're all the same and all this kind of stuff. But if you say to them, as we're doing this week in Newport, are you interested in the fact that this primary school is threatened with closure, they absolutely are. If you ask them questions about art galleries and libraries being under threat of closure, they absolutely are. So people are interested in politics. And do we have a role in the Welsh media in trying to address that democratic deficit, the question we're asked today? Well, of course we do, to an extent. But we've also got a duty to reflect the views and opinions of our readers. And I don't believe our job is to talk down to them or browbeat them about their lack of interest in or their antipathy towards politics or politicians. So I don't believe you should blame the media for a decline in people's interest in politics. And let me tell you what we do at the South Wales Argus. And earlier there was a lot of talk about London-centric in relation to Wales, and I think if you ask a lot of people outside of Cardiff, they will talk about Cardiff-centric. So for those of you who are Cardiff-centric, the South Wales Argus is the daily newspaper for Newport, which is a city about 10 miles to the east, just outside England. And home, I hasten to add, to Britain's newest football league club. But at the Argus, in print and online, we cover politics every single day. We send reporters to community council meetings, city council meetings. We have a reporter at the Assembly at least one day a week. All of our MPs and AMs in our circulation area write a column for us on a rota basis. And we run a weekly political column that looks behind some of the key issues that affect our readers. And all of those are changes that I've brought in the last year since I became editor at the Argus, because I recognise that politics is important, even if it could not seem to be interesting. Part of our job is to try and make that interesting. So my brief to my reporters is, if you go to a council meeting and Councillor A stands up and has a row with Councillor B on party political issues, I'm not very interested, because I don't think our readers are. What they want to know is, what effect do the decisions that their local councillors and AMs and MPs have on their daily lives? And that's, I think, how we should try and get it across to people. And as I say, I'm not interested in tit-for-tat politics. In my experience, the only people who tend to be interested in that are politicians themselves. I referred earlier to the Police and Crime Commissioner elections last year. And during those elections, we ran pages and pages of stories about it in the run-up to the election. We gave every candidate in the Gwent election space in the paper to get their policies across. And we even ran an online hustings debate between the candidates and our online readers. And you know what? One of the polling stations in Newport still had a turnout of 0. So we can ram political information down our readers' throats, but if they're not interested, they won't take it in. And we can get the message out there, but sometimes I think the quality of the message leaves a lot to be desired. And I'd like to see, personally, a lot more of our elected representatives have the guts to stand up and talk on their own behalf. So often, as a journalist, when we want to interview a government minister or even a non-cabinet MP or AM, first of all, we've got to deal with their press officer, who will tell us the kind of things that he or she wants to talk about and the kind of issues they want to talk about, and then they'll sit in on that interview, and if Councillor X or AMY says something that's a little bit off message, you might get the press officer leaning forward and saying, well, I'm not sure we want that message getting across. These people are elected. Talk for yourselves. That's what you're elected to do. I don't have the answer to the democratic deficit in Wales, but I am sure of one thing, and I'm absolutely sure of this: the solution is not to have more politicians. I think we need better quality politicians. I think we need people who can engage the public with their ideas and their personalities, and people who actually deliver on their manifestos, because my belief is that people have had enough of sound bites and spin and broken promises. And I think we need politicians who don't blame the media for their own failings, but sit down and work with us. And there's lots of examples of that. I mean, at the moment, we're running a campaign to try and help promote the use of the minor injuries unit at afael, which is under threat of closure, and we're doing that hand in hand with the local AM. It's a good example of how we can work together. But I don't believe, as Kevin Maguire said this morning, that we're the problem. I also don't believe we're the solution. But what we might be is part of the solution to part of the problem. Thank you.
You seem to echo some of what was being said this morning about, you know, we need better politicians, perhaps not more, less PR control, being more frank and open, and this sense that we had from Kevin that maybe what Wales needs is a sort of authority figures to lead the debate. Is that something that, you know, you think in you're looking at your news coverage, do you wish there was, you know, a figure who would lead the debate and shape it a little bit more?
Well, I do, and I'm not suggesting for a second that we haven't got some of that, and I know I was a bit disparaging about the Police and Crime Commissioner elections earlier, but actually in Gwent, the guy who won that, an ex-policeman called Ian Johnston, is actually precisely that type of figure. You know, kind of says what he feels, is not afraid to shake up the apple cart a bit, not afraid to call a spade a bloody shovel when it needs being said. And I mean, he did an interview with us, for example, a couple of weeks ago, where he said that he felt that the police crime statistics were effectively being manipulated to make things look better for the force. The press officer who sat next to him nearly had a heart attack when he said it. But we need more of that. We need more people who are prepared to stand up and say what they think, not just to toe the party line.
Okay, let's open it up to questions. Who'd like to kick off for Kevin? Go on, don't be shy. Sarah.
Hello, Sarah. I mean, you were saying that, you know, politics matters to people when it's very local and immediate. Yet on the other hand,
You can take the mic.
you were saying that politics matters to people when it's really local and immediate, stuff to do with their hospitals and their schools. And yet around, you know, the time of the Assembly elections, there was a polling station that recorded 0. So what can the Assembly and local papers do to, make that kind of relevance much more immediate and obvious to people?
Well, it was the Police and Crime Commissioner elections, actually,
Sorry.
that was the zero turnout, and I suspect that wasn't so much to do with politics per se as the fact that a lot of people just didn't understand what they were being asked to vote for. They kind of thought, well, am I voting for a chief constable? But I'm not going to answer on behalf of the Assembly because I don't think that's my job. But as far as we're concerned, my view is that we have a duty to explain politics in terms of what it actually means to our readers, and I think that's what we try and do. So, when we're referring to, I don't know, the bedroom tax for an example of something that's current, we'll go out and talk to people who are actually involved in that situation, and I think that's the best way of doing it. You sort of refer to case studies and bring it home to people like that. But I think more and more what people also want to feel is that they are being respected by the people that they vote into office. And, we had I won't name the person involved, but we had a prime example this week in our area where I refer to the fact there's a school that's under threat of closure, and the parents and pupils staged a big demonstration yesterday, and then went into a private meeting with some of their ward councillors, who also happen to be the cabinet members who are taking the decisions. And during that meeting, which I assume got fairly raucous, one of the councillors stood up and said, I'm not going to carry on with this if you keep disrespecting me. Well, that's the tail wagging the dog. If you're an elected representative, you're a public servant. It's not the other way round. And I think, more people in public life need to remember that.
Yeah. I mean, I remember this being brought up at another such meeting that we had about the state of the press in Wales. And I was talking to Martin Shipton of West Mail and NUJ, and he got quite outraged at the idea that there's been a substantial public subsidy to the press over the years by way of public notices, and indeed in the good old days, huge job adverts for the Welsh Assembly government and so on in the West Mail and so on. And in a sense, those papers which have been owned by multinationals have creamed off the profits, given it to the shareholders. That you could argue that money, that public money, was not reinvested in journalism in Wales. Are you prepared, I'd be interested in what the others think when the time comes, are you prepared to see some sort of quid pro quo for that there should be some kind of a deal involved in that? Yes, there's public advertising. That is in a sense a public subsidy, and we're buying something with it, which I know you're not making the profits now in a way, it's a bit of an academic question, but should there not be a bit of that attitude there, that this is an investment in a sense in a kind of public service journalism?
I guess that depends whether I'm going to answer that with my company hat on or as an individual.
You're just amongst close circle of friends.
That's
here,
right, yeah,
to
no.
be frank.
It is quite a difficult question to answer because it kind of, is it a public subsidy? I don't know. You can argue that both ways. You could say that the BBC talking this week about going far deeper into investing into local is also a publicly subsidised organisation that is going to be competing more with my organisation, which isn't. You could argue that the hyperlocal Caerphilly Observer website, which is now going to produce a print edition, which is being paid for initially via a public grant of European money, is publicly subsidised, but is a competitive launch against a newspaper that's already in that area. So that it's quite a complicated area, I think. Look, if I speak as an editor of a newspaper, do I want more money to be invested in my newspaper? Of course I do. But, we've also got to live with the harsh commercial realities of life, and that is that, we don't just, by the way, it's not every newspaper in Wales is owned by a multinational. That point needs to be made because some are still family owned. But, business is business. And, if you are a company that in the past has made X amount of profit margin, the way that business works is that it's built upon debt. That debt has to be serviced. That debt is serviced by investors, and those investors will only continue to invest if they believe they're getting a return from it. So, it's not as easy as it, and not as simplistic as it sounds, I don't think.
Okay, and you've made the point kind of powerfully that the Argus still sends reporters to council meetings, sends them regularly to the courts and so on as well. Other newspapers, not necessarily in Wales, but possibly Wales as well, have taken a different view, that as they have to cut costs, those are the areas they cut back because they don't believe the public are as interested in that as they are in the sport or the celebrity or whatever. Your decision to maintain that service, is that based on what you think the public wants or what they need or what your responsibility as a journalist is?
It's based on 30 years in the industry, and you know, we had cut back on some of that stuff before I arrived in the editor's chair, and that's not being disparaging of my predecessor, because everybody's got a different view. But you know, the facts are there, and the reality is that in editorial terms and in terms of our sales, you know, newspaper editors often get accused, you know, of you're only interested in selling newspapers. Well, that's funny, isn't it? Because that's my job. But you know, the reality is that the things that work best for our readers and the things that sell us the most papers in general are courts and crime and councils and that kind of thing. And I still believe they're meat and drink for local newspapers. And you know, Kevin Maguire said it earlier, you know, cherish what you've got, because if we weren't here, who would be scrutinising local councils? Nobody. If we weren't here, who would be you know, covering magistrates' courts and seeing that justice is seen to be done? Nobody. And you know, I think that even though resources are tight, there's no doubt about that, it's still vitally important that we cover those areas because I think they're hugely important to the public.
And what happens to the public if those things don't get covered? What's the risk of the democratic deficit?
Well, I just think it widens, because you know, if you're not aware of how justice is being seen to be done, if you're not aware of, I don't know, the senior officers' pay scandal at Caerphilly Council, you know, that came out through our coverage after a whistleblower came to us. Peter from the BBC earlier today was talking about how the BBC were covering one of the select committees here that was looking at the Caldecott and Wentloog Drainage Board and a scandal with public money there. And that was a story that we broke, you know, 9 months ago. And again, I just believe that if local newspapers aren't there, or if their coverage is reduced to really sort of tiny levels, and we don't do that kind of thing, those things will go unnoticed for years and years.
Okay, more questions? Kevin? Yeah, lady at the back.
Pnawn da, I'm Non Gwilym, I work in the National Assembly for Wales. I'm really interested in what you had to say about covering councils. So there was an interesting point this morning for me where I think all the panel agreed that looking at issues was more attractive to their audience than looking at the structures and monitoring, if you want, the structures that were discussing those issues. That's certainly something we've tried to do here. Our members tell us always that the local papers are interested in how issues they're dealing with on a national level affect their constituents in their local areas. So we've tried to develop case studies. We've had a fantastic couple of examples in a residential care inquiry where we actually, rather than just say, this is a report from the committee, we worked with some of the stakeholders who contributed and made sure that their stories were known to their local press. Did something similar with a stillbirth inquiry as well. So I'm interested in what your take would be on that. So I think we have a role to play here at the Assembly. We have a limited resource here as well. We're a public sector organisation, and we have to demonstrate good value for money in terms of what we produce. We're going down this kind of localised, specialised route, but it's difficult for us. So it's more of a commentary more than anything else, but I'm really interested in this, in your take on let's monitor the structure, the council or the assembly, versus let's look at the issue and look out to see who's considering it now.
Well, to an extent we have to do both, because, you know, I think when we're talking about, political structures, if you like, you know, post-elections and changes to cabinets and leaders and all that kind of thing, you know, obviously we cover it. When you're talking about implementation of policy, then, you know, my view is the best way of explaining that is by showing the people that it affects in that sort of case study way. You know, I don't expect public organisations or charities or anybody like that to kind of do our job for us, but it helps us a lot if, you know, a prime example, foster care fortnight, and, you know, I was a foster carer for a number of years, and the reason I got into it was because I had real life stories of of what it meant to people and what it meant to the kids who were cared for. And you know, that's really important, I think, those kind of case studies. But often it's more about, you know, an organisation pointing us in the right direction towards people who are willing to talk to us than actually, you know, saying let's put a load of resource in actually going to get these case studies and doing the interviews and then just presenting it.
So case studies and examples is one thing. Is there anything else that, you know, a kind of assembly press team can do to support what you need as a local editor?
If I'm honest, a lot of the press offices across our public organisations do a pretty good job on fairly limited resources. I go back to the point I made earlier, which is that I would much rather that they actually did less work, and the people that, you know, we elect into power talk on their own behalf, because I think that's far more important.
Okay. Any final questions for Kevin?
Could I just...
Yeah.
Perhaps extends the questions that have already been asked, and particularly Richard's point to you then. But Jonathan might have something to say as well on this one. When we all started in '99, there were assembly correspondents, the Argus and the Evening Post, and they were excellent correspondents, incidentally. They produced some of the most interesting stories and analysis that, you know, that was in the first assembly. Now, those days seem to have gone. And, you know, I understand the business model has shifted. But how could the Assembly help in getting that sort of level of analysis and output? Because clearly, as regional papers, an awful lot of what happens in the Assembly is highly relevant. In fact, you're, in many ways, the key papers for us, as you know, Kevin said this morning, with a large circulation. So how are you, it seems to me you're getting quite a lot of coverage from other news sources, but on the more political side, assembly side, is there something that we could be looking at now?
Well, I mean, I accept that there's a certain irony that in '99, when the assembly started with far fewer powers than it has now, we all decided to invest in having reporters sat here 5 days a week in an office, and the economics have changed. There's no doubt about that. I mean, can I afford to have a reporter in the Assembly building 5 days a week? No, I can't. Can I afford to cover it more than we did before last year? Well, yes, I can, and that's why we've got a reporter here based here every Tuesday and in touch with all of our local AMs. You know, certain things have changed, certain things haven't. So, you know, we used to have to pay a fee for office and desk space in the Assembly, and there was, when I suggested having a reporter back here for a while, there was some suggestion that would still be the case, and I said, well, you either want us here or you don't. I mean, I think that we are doing a better job now than we did in terms of covering the Assembly. Can the Assembly do more? Well, I think that there's certainly some room for manoeuvre in talking to all of us, as particularly daily newspapers, in terms of the feed that goes to the BBC for Democracy Live or whatever. Well, I don't see any reason why that feed shouldn't be extended to all local newspapers, because we've all got websites and we all carry video. You know, that would certainly help, I think, in terms of getting that across to a wider audience. But I think it's down to individual editors. You know, my belief is, yes, the Assembly is important, and therefore we should cover it more than we did, which we do. But other editors will have a different view.
Okay, well, on that note, let's start turning across to other editors.
Right, hello, thank you very much for having me today. I'm here representing the weekly newspapers in Wales. I work for the Western Telegraph, one of 2 largest paid-for weekly newspapers in the country. Some just general figures from the Newspaper Society. These relate to the whole of the UK. I couldn't actually get the Welsh figures in time for this, but 30.9 million people read a local newspaper every week in the UK. It's the most widely read print medium in Britain. There's 1,100 local newspapers and 1,600 associated newspapers in the UK, according to the Newspaper Society. And in Wales, 5 daily newspapers, about 29 paid-for weeklies, 4 free weeklies, and 1 Sunday paper. And obviously there's other magazines and area magazines and Welsh language publications as well. Local papers are just that. We contain items that matter to our readers, relate to the areas, the geographic location that we work in. But of course, we do cover subjects that matter to our readers on the wider scale as well. So all sorts of decisions that are made here do affect our readers, and we will reflect that. But we may present it, as Kevin's referred to earlier, in a way that relates directly to their lives. I moved to Wales 3 years ago. I didn't know about, much about how democracy, how the government worked here at all. And it was an interesting question for me when I moved here. Where do people get their Welsh government news from? There's some, there are some excellent TV programmes, there's some excellent radio programmes, and of course there's the Western Mail, but a lot of people don't go there. And, there's lots of information online, but unless you know where to go online or somebody's directing you there, you're not going to necessarily go and click onto it. I'm lucky I get to see all the press releases, I get to meet the politicians, I get to talk about things, and most people don't. But as a local paper, we are in regular contact with all of our AMs that cover the area. We also encourage people to participate in democracy and play their part in local government. And like Kevin, we cover council meetings, county council, we'll cover community councils if something's going on and I can get somebody to a meeting that's relevant. We cover the national park meetings, we go to the health board meetings and the community health council meetings. They're a very important part of what we do as a local newspaper, and we also still try and attend magistrates' court when we can. But with the best will in the world, I have a team of 4 or 5 reporters covering the whole of Pembrokeshire, doing the whole scope of news and that's going on there. We can't do everything. And of course, when it comes to covering the Welsh Assembly, we can't send somebody here. It's just not possible. But if there's something going on that is directly relevant to people in Pembrokeshire, we of course will be covering it, whether that's through interviewing the AMs afterwards, watching live streaming. There are ways of getting information that we will do that. And until recently, perhaps our main coverage of issues not directly Pembrokeshire-centric has been, we have been running things on things like organ donation, plastic bags, referendums. But to say, it depends on resources, it depends what else is going on in the week. Where we are in Pembrokeshire, if something major's kicking off, we'll have less space available for covering more general items. We do, in Pembrokeshire, like most areas, a lot of the major Welsh things that are going on are very relevant. Pembrokeshire's had the issues of the potential badger cull, TB vaccinations, farming, hugely important to industry in Pembrokeshire. Health, obviously, reorganisation. We've got lots of campaigns going on at the moment, issues with Scaboo and losing that. We've had significant education issues with child safeguarding, a major issue in Pembrokeshire. Planning, broadband, transport, roads, all vitally key things to Pembrokeshire that we are covering week in, week out in our newspaper. So, there is this perception that local newspapers don't necessarily cover Welsh affairs, but some of that is just expectation of what we as a local paper will have within our pages. There's nothing I'd like to do more than include, have more comprehensive coverage of what's going on here. I used to love covering council meetings, it's my kind of thing, but we just can't do that. We're reliant on advertising heavily. The amount of space I have in my newspaper depends on the advertising. Advertising revenues are down. It's tough out there for everybody. Lots of competition for the same pots of money, particularly in a community like Pembrokeshire, which means I can't have the extra pages I might want, I can't have the extra staff I might want, and I would need to do any more than we're already doing. But, there's still things that we can do, and recently an opportunity came for me to have some more space in the newspaper, and we have started a new page specifically dedicated to Welsh matters and what's going on. And part of that's because there is this feeling that people don't necessarily understand how things work and what's going on. And that's partly just from my own understanding and my staff's understanding of how things work and what the issues are, and knowing where people do get their information from. So we took the decision to include an extra page. We're still working at a dedicated page on matters that are happening here. which we've been including lots of stories that would not otherwise get any space in the newspaper. That's very early days. It's been going about 6 weeks, I think, now. We're waiting to see what kind of feedback we get and also how we can develop that and perhaps involve the AMs a bit more in what we do with that. But there's a lot of talk about declining newspaper sales generally, but as Kevin was saying, our audience online is continually growing. People dip in and out of the website through the day and come back week on week. At the Western Telegraph, we're getting about 400,000 page views a month, which is it's fairly significant, 45 to 50,000 unique users a month. Pembrokeshire's a population of about 117,000. We're nearly sort of half the number of people there visiting the website every month. That figure always rises. We do however, get particular spikes when something happens. Now, it's very noticeable that the two most read stories on our website this year so far have been The Beast of Tenby, when a carcass washed up on Tenby Beach. We spiked that month to 70,500 unique users, largely because of that one story. We also had 1,500 hits from a Russian website that people coming through. So, that's the kind of thing that's bringing more people to our site. The other story that was very well read and also appeared in the national newspapers was, I don't know if you read about the Keepy Uppy man from Milford Haven, a portly sort of 50-year-old gentleman who amazing ball skills, and somebody managed to video him and put him on YouTube, and he then got invited to the World Freestyling Championships and things. And they're the two most read stories so far this year on our website. But obviously, with the website, space isn't an issue. We can include more, and the important thing is once you've got somebody on your website, you can then get them looking at other bits and other pieces of information. Social media is obviously a key thing that all newspapers are looking at, how we can interact between our, with our readers and bring that into what we're doing. We all have, all the websites will now have their own Twitter accounts. Facebook's very important as well. People seem very willing to comment on stories on Facebook, more so even than on our website. So we're using that, and we're also feeding comments and things from those platforms back into the newspapers to help with the debate. We can also carry things like live blogs, and one that was fairly popular recently is our sort of election night coverage. And on the local papers, it's really interesting to see that people will come in and log in and want to know what's happening minute by minute through the evening. We even did one, we had an electoral division by-election recently, and that was for Burton, one of our smaller sort of areas in the county. And okay, it only had, it had 440 views, but for the size of Burton, you're thinking actually that's quite interesting that there was that demand. We were there blogging, late into the evening. And websites are brilliant for traditional news organisations like ourselves. We know people will come to our sites because we're a trusted source of information. We can include picture galleries and the pictures and things that we can't have space for in the newspaper, we can put online. We can add things like videos. We have live traffic updates and things on there. So it's very good. And, it's somewhere that our journalists can come into their own because amid gossip flying around when an incident happens in town, people can know they can come to our website because we'll have the official trusted information of what's been happening. Albeit perhaps slower because we do like to check our facts rather than just tweet immediately when we find out a piece of information. But as other organisations found, having a website doesn't solve everything because you need to direct people there to get that information. So I still believe that there is a place for print media and there always, there's going to be for some time to come. And we do have a very key role to play in helping businesses and organisations promote themselves. Many businesses now moving to online websites and reducing their advertising spend, but they still need an advert to point people to the websites and where they're going. But it's more important than ever to use a mix of approaches to get information and news stories out to people. Just look at the police commissioner elections. One of the biggest complaints from readers in our area was that the only place they could go for information, apart from the articles we were reporting, was online. We did carry a series of articles. We had views from the candidates, the two candidates that we had in Dyfed Powers, and Pembrokeshire had something like the second highest turnout in the whole of Wales. So while it still wasn't a terribly high figure though, but it doesn't matter how many articles and things that, as Kevin said, that we write. If people don't want to engage, they're not going to. One of the biggest complaints we get from people, you ask them why don't you go and vote, aren't you involved, is that they feel they don't trust politicians, that there's not enough difference between everybody anymore. They're a bit disillusioned by the authorities and also by things, consultation processes that become just tick box exercises. We had an incident, or a situation recently where, with all the health changes going on, members of the public were asked to participate in a consultation process. Obviously, as a local newspaper, we're encouraging people to do that and submit the forms and do things. But then the feedback that came back afterwards was that there'd been too many responses from Pembrokeshire, which had skewed the data of the result in the consultation, which you're just telling people, well, it doesn't matter what you say, what you've said in Pembrokeshire doesn't count because not enough people in Carmarthenshire or somewhere else have put the information forward. Didn't leave a very good impression with our readers who were feeling very ignored. So general participation in democratic affairs is something that I feel needs tackling in all communities. I was very shocked when I moved to Pembrokeshire that on the county council there's 13 out of 60 uncontested seats at the county council level. Just seems amazingly high. Everywhere I've been there's always uncontested seats, but it seems a lot. So I think we need to look at why don't people stand, and as well as why don't people vote. In Pembrokeshire, you still get the comments, oh, my vote doesn't count, it doesn't matter. In Pembrokeshire it does, because the seats have changed hands, both at the Assembly and Westminster seats have changed hands quite a few times. Particularly in South Pembrokeshire, West Carmarthenshire area, it's been too close to call in both elections. When everybody you talk to, it could have been one of three parties that would win that seat. So people's vote does count in Pembrokeshire, and therefore it's important for people to use that vote. I think part of the problem is, and again, I get this from talking to young journalists and people when they come into the paper. Any young journalist that comes into a newspaper, we have to train on public affairs. They learn about local government, they learn about how government works in the UK, but they don't get that from anywhere else. They come in not knowing much, which seems a great shame that obviously we're going through the whole education system. I'm exactly the same. When I was at school, I wasn't taught about how about politics, how government works. And it seems that that's something key we should be doing with our young people, is encouraging them to get involved and realise how important it is to be what Pembrokeshire County Council is now calling, be an active citizen in the community. And there's a lot of good work I know that's going on in Pembrokeshire at the moment in our local schools to try and encourage young people in the hope that they'll carry that through their education with them and into adulthood, to encourage them to be active and to vote and take part in and understanding what's going on in their community and being involved with that. Some of this has come through that they've just recently published a book, a Councillor Griff booklet, which introduces Year 5 and 6 pupils to the workings of the council. It's been done in sort of a lively way to try and encourage them to learn. And there's a really interesting project they do with the sixth formers as well in Pembrokeshire, which is where they actually take them somewhere for a day and let them run a council themselves and learn about, you need a director of transport, you need whatever it might be, director of social services. And it really engages them and shows them what's happening. And, all the schools now as well, they do things like mock elections, they have school councils and things. So hopefully that will be something that is developed. And this is going to take a long time for things to change and to come through, but this is one of the things that Pembrokeshire has really identified as something that can help. Another thing that's and it's a little bit reflects some of the comments that Kevin made, whereby people aren't sort of necessarily willing to stand up and say what they actually really believe. And it's not just politicians, we also get it with people, comments to the newspaper and things where people, don't want to give a name anymore, or they don't want to get involved, they don't want to put their head above the parapet in case they're going to get lots of sniping and a backlash on Twitter or whatever it might be. And that's a shame, really, and that's something I think as well that we need to be thinking about. I'm not sure there's how you solve that problem, but I think that's an issue that we need to be encouraging people, that yes, you do have a right to say something. And of course, everybody has a right to write to their local newspaper and talk about issues, and we will highlight things and take up a cause where appropriate. So what I'd say is that while the Welsh local and regional media may be, there are areas where it's lacking, we do have some excellent newspapers that should be supported in any way they can be. There's lots of talk now with citizen journalism. You see the events in Woolwich, it's all come through Twitter and people there on the scene with their mobile phones. But there's still a place for professional journalism where facts are checked and news is presented in an independent way. And all sides of a matter are given an opportunity to be heard. And it's not all doom and gloom, as I say. There's lots of really good things going on, and we're trying to do our bit at the Western Telegraph. I mentioned we do now have a page dedicated to Welsh news. We've also recently introduced, and it's gone a bit, in the old days we all used to have our council page and that kind of thing. We've reintroduced that kind of page, but more from the forum of including interesting debates and comments from councillors on subjects that may not have actually come up at meetings, but it's something that they're interested in. We include a list of where all the meetings are being held that members of the public can attend. We run that weekly. And no doubt when it comes to election time, we'll be encouraging people and giving out information on how to stand, how to vote, make sure you're registered to vote. Lots of these things we do anyway, but again, it's a way of making sure that we do it every week in the newspaper. So, there is lots of things, and that there is a democratic deficit, I would say, but I think it goes beyond this perceived lack of coverage by the media. And I think we need to encourage people from all angles to do their bit and be active in the communities. And we need to encourage people to use all the outlets to get their voices heard, and that includes local newspapers.
Can I just pick up on one thing you said? I think I got this right. You said you can't afford to send a reporter to every council meeting anymore. That's certainly not in the scope of what you're able to offer. We try to get to as many of the major council meetings as we can do. There will be the odd smaller committees that if we've had a look at the agenda, we won't do. But we will, of course, if we don't get to a council meeting, we will follow that up afterwards. So I was going to say, to the extent that you're unable to cover them, does that matter, either to your newspaper or to the community? And if so, why and how?
I think some people perhaps might not notice if we didn't cover something, but I think as a local paper, we do have a duty to let people know what decisions have been made on their behalves by the people that they've elected or not, in the case of the uncontested seats. But a duty to let people know what's going on.
It's a sense of your kind of responsibility, rather than you think the readers might stop buying it.
I think there's a mix of it. I don't think it would necessarily make that much of a difference to sometimes readers, some of our readers. However, our job as a newspaper is to include as much of everything as we can, and we have a mix of lighter-hearted, other kinds of stories, human interest stories as well.
Okay, great. Who'd like to ask Holly some questions?
Holly, I'm really interested to hear how you covered the TB question, because that really was an important local story, obviously, if you were in North Pembrokeshire with the proposed test site. But it was one of the biggest stories, not just for Wales, but the UK at the time, in terms of the approach to this issue. And I know as an Assembly member who doesn't represent, it's 100 miles at least until you get to part of Pembrokeshire from where I represent. But, I was having emails from all sorts of pressure groups constantly about it. So I suppose my question is, how did you cover the story, and what contact, if any, did you make with the Assembly and with the Wales government to get information to inform that story? And was that adequate? Could it have been done better? Or did you rely on other systems entirely? I
think it was a mix of everything, really. We did have a lot of dealings with the press officers here in Cardiff and all around. But TB has been an issue that's been ongoing in Pembrokeshire for many, many, many years. It wasn't a new thing for us. I think that, to me, one of the bigger issues that we had and difficulty in getting information was that a lot of the farmers and people weren't willing to put their name out there because they were worried about the backlash that they were going to get if they stood out front and said what they really thought. So at times we were feeling like we were perhaps being a little bit one-sided in some ways because it was difficult to get that other viewpoint out there, although obviously the unions were very good in helping with that. it was a big issue, but it was one that even in Pembrokeshire, there was a huge divide between those that were pro-cull and those that weren't. And as a local paper, all we could do was reflect all sides. We do also produce 2 farming newspapers, so obviously they had a slightly different approach to the main newspaper. But it was an issue. As we tackled it like we would any other issue, you get the views from all sides that you can, as much information as you can, and you put it out there, and you give people a chance on your letters page to debate any further issues and bits that they want to.
Just, you mentioned letters pages there. I mean, that's an interesting point. Do people still write letters? Do they email? Do you get that level of engagement, or has that changed over time, do you think?
I think it's slightly changed in that when you do get letters, they tend to be more on specific issues. So wind turbines is something we get a particularly lot of letters about at the moment. The Badger Cull, as I say, was another one. I think people are a lot more willing now that they write on something that they really care about and put pen to paper. Anything else, they're more likely to comment perhaps on the website or in a shorter form online. And obviously a lot of our older readers are still the ones who will write the traditional letters. I think younger people no longer use that as a way of communication. So
it's still a forum for kind of your readers to debate
we still
things,
cover it,
but less than it was.
Yeah, we actually increased the amount of space that we were giving over to letters, I think last year sometime, because we felt that that it is still a forum. We include at least 2 pages of letters and comment every week. So it's normally about 1.5 pages of letters and then half a page that's taken from comments from our websites, whether that's the main website or, as I say, increasingly Facebook comments.
Okay. Any final questions for Holly? Anyone? No? Okay, Holly, thank you very much indeed. And we'll push on then to Jonathan Roberts from South Wales Evening Post.
Good afternoon, everybody. Seems I've drawn the short straw here and going third. A lot of what
You're the finale, Jonathan.
The finale,
you're
absolutely.
The main act.
Yeah.
You've been building. Everyone's been your warm-up.
I'll take that. Yeah. A lot of what I'm going to say you've probably already heard, but I think at least it reinforces the point that we probably all can't be wrong here. We're all experiencing the same kind of issues. I'll kick off as Kevin did by just saying a thank you to Rosemary for the invitation to speak. She and I met quite recently where we discussed many of the issues we're touching on today. Principally, of course, how do we raise the profile of the decision-making process in this country? If we take audience first and ask ourselves a question, when a politician speaks, who's really listening? Because while politics is integral to everything that we do, it would appear that it fails to seize the public's attention in the same way that the need to register your preference for a dancing dog over an opera singer on a TV talent show might. Voter turnout at elections of recent times that have called the Welsh public to the ballot box suggests apathy and disinterest. Little more than 41% bothered at the Assembly election in 2011, and as both Holly and Kevin have touched on, the less said about the Police and Crime Commissioners election, the better. So this suggests a disconnect between our politicians and the public themselves. Now, we in the Welsh press have something in common with our elected members at the Senate. Recent headlines have done nothing to dissuade people that the stereotypical image of the politician who's only in it for him or herself, or the reporter who will do anything, literally anything for a story, is very far from reality. So there are perhaps people who either don't believe or simply aren't interested in what our politicians have to say. An interest in the democratic process is, in my view, a specialist subject. It's not really for the masses. It's never going to attract the same audience numbers as the TV talent shows, even with a dancing dog. And as editors, we're measured by many things, but principally it's our ability to sell newspapers. So it's critical for us that our content delivers what it is our audience expects. Now, I have to ask myself, what do the readers of the South Wales Evening Post want to see each day in their local paper? We have national Welsh media organisations that present a balanced digest of the goings-on within the transparent walls of the Welsh Assembly. These stories are fundamental to our way of life. They're about our health service, our environment, our education, and therefore our children. These are stories of national importance, which is why the media outlets with a national remit can easily make the case for heavy political content from the Senate. The question is more difficult when viewed from the regional media perspective. We don't have a national remit, ours is a local one. And the stories we publish have to be relevant to the people around us. They don't pick up the Evening Post every day to read about Wales. They want to read about Swansea, which is why local government enjoys such a high profile within the local press. It's the same word, it's local, it's relevant. Yes, it could quite easily be argued that a policy affecting Wales therefore affects Swansea, and stories of this nature are already printed in the Evening Post each day, though perhaps not always offered the kind of profile they can expect in the Welsh national media. Which brings me to resource. The regional newspaper industry is undergoing not so much a transformation at present, but really it's a revolution. Newspaper sales have been in decline for many years, and yet our audience has never been more engaged. Our websites continue to grow, expand and gain in popularity. Fewer people today want to read newspapers, but the demand for quality local news journalism has never diminished. People simply want to receive it in alternative ways and at different times. Now, I recently made the point that we're no longer a newspaper with a website. We've now become digital media businesses with newspapers. We live our lives very differently today. We have such a thirst for information, for entertainment, and we want it right now. And it would be impossible for a regional newspaper business to survive simply by maintaining the old status quo. The role of the traditional paper is changing. It's no longer the vehicle for breaking news, even within the communities we serve. And there's a thirst for a different kind of story out there now too. Online it's about the quirky, the user-generated videos, the fun and the entertainment. A colleague of mine tells a terrific tale about his time as a reporter for BBC Online. He spent several days researching and writing a political piece for the website. He finished half a day early, so his editor told him to visit a house in West Wales where there was a cat with 26 toes. You can see where this is going to end up. The political piece attracted 48,000 visitors, and the cat managed 1.5 million. Now, this change, of course, isn't without its casualties. As an industry, we're in a position where one arm of the business, the digital brand, is enjoying significant growth, while the other, the print product, is in decline. Now, some would predict terminal decline, but I think the likelihood of that scenario materialising in the medium to long term, if at all, is very much up for debate. We still sell tens of thousands of our newspaper every day, and of course, as Kevin mentioned, or it may well have been Richard, the Evening Post remains the country's biggest selling title.
That wasn't me, I didn't say that.
As I said, I thought it probably wasn't, actually. What is certain, however, is that revenue generation remains the domain of the print product. And combined with the perfect storm, if you like, of the worst economic environment in history, you're left with, in the case of some newspapers, falling revenues, meaning fewer resources and then tighter management of the remainder. There are fewer jobs for journalists today. That's an unfortunate reality of the modern world of newspapers. In an ideal world, an editor could send a dozen reporters to the Senedd each week, but with a smaller resource, reporters have to be directed to where they're guaranteed to be most productive, where the stories they produce are going to be relevant to the circulation area and deliver what the audience demands. Now, I can't have a journalist sat in Cardiff Bay all day providing copies on matters with only a tenuous link to Swansea. It's a luxury I just can't afford. Stories don't happen in newsrooms, just as politics, in the eyes of the Welsh public at least, isn't about what's discussed here. It's about how it affects them out there. Which is why when newspapers have the option of either sending a reporter to listen to the process of government or watching its implementation and effect in the community around them, we may not be able to do both. So does that mean that local papers simply wash their hands of the Welsh Government and leave the Senedd Press Office to churn out the press releases? Well, I don't think we're quite there yet. And in truth, there's plenty of reason to be positive. We do already carry a quota from Cardiff, courtesy of a combination of the work done by our own journalists, the press office here, news agencies, and our contact with our local AMs in the Swansea area. The presiding officer, understandably, was keen for this profile to be increased. And has already asked me how the Welsh Government could seek to engage more proactively with the Welsh public. How can our politicians ensure that the press and public are more involved in the democratic process? Now, it certainly will seem unusual to be quoting late stand-up comedians at an event such as this, but if we take inspiration from Frank Carson, it's just the way you tell them. It's my view that people, they don't buy process, they don't necessarily buy policy, but they buy people. And if you want to broaden the appeal of the first two, then you need to get the third one right. So let's just take a few minutes to explore some examples. Elections aside, One standout example of the regional press fully engaging with the political process is probably the budget. We're so interested in it, we're waiting for the Chancellor to leave for work with his shiny red briefcase. We'll print special pullouts full of the whats, the whys, the wheres, and critically, of course, the whos, because that's where the local angle comes in. It's the case studies which reveal how the process and the policy is affecting the people. Because when Mrs. Jones, who's 65 and lives in her 2-bedroom terraced house with husband Bernard and their Jack Russell Terrier, tells us she's unable to enjoy her morning cigarette because the cost is now prohibitive, that's what people relate to. Because there are hundreds and thousands of Mrs. Joneses in our community. They're all affected the same way, and when Mrs. Jones has her say, then they all do. It's the people that matter. The process and the policy are only the supporting cast, but their relevance is clearly demonstrated by the human response at the end of the chain. If we take another example, I think Holly mentioned wind farms. There's a huge debate, I guess, over whether they're actually designed to produce energy, but they're certainly designed to generate some letters for local newspapers. And they generate stories too, because a report about the government's renewable energy policy is nowhere near as interesting as a story about a giant windmill towering above people's homes, disturbing their sleep and killing the local wildlife, as the anti-wind farm campaigners may well claim. If we stick with the environment, I recently had a conversation with a Welsh AM about flooding. She'd been to a village in West Wales which had suffered a particularly severe bout of excess rainfall. Water was surrounding their homes, and then she described how some drivers in lorries and 4x4 vehicles have been attempting to increase speed through the water in order to send, or to see how high they could send a wave up the side of people's homes. Now, what's more interesting? A politician talking about Wales needing to address the ever-increasing menace of climate change through a series of policies, or a human interest piece like the one I've described, which will also contain the same information about a series of policies just a little further down the page. It's the human interest element of that story that promoted it to the front page of the paper that day. One final example. During my time as editor of the Carmarthen Journal, I met with several of the area's local elected members. Many of them had one particular point they wanted to raise with the editor, the reintroduction of their respective columns, which had disappeared some months before. I eventually agreed, but on the condition that they contained no political point scoring whatsoever, because the fact that Labour can do things, in its opinion, better than the Tories or vice versa, it just isn't what people want to read. That's for the political anoraks. It isn't about people. The general public want to know what's being done by our politicians for them. It's the same question. When a politician speaks, who's really listening? And actually, there's plenty of people out there willing to listen. You just have to tell it the right way. And there's many examples of our politicians getting this right. When the Assembly asked people to suggest laws for this country, it didn't just create a buzz around the political process, it led to the implementation of a policy that's transformed the way we shop. And it's the reason why I can't find a carrier bag in the house anymore. But the growth of our digital brand also heralds a new approach in the way we produce news. The tools of the trade are changing. A mobile phone today has become as important to a journalist as a notebook and pen. We can now write our stories remotely, take pictures and video and upload them directly to our websites. Reporters spend more time in the field and less time at their desks. It offers real potential to increase the amount of stories we carry online and also the type of story too. During my discussion with Rosemary, I mentioned that a video of Swansea City manager Michael Laudrup playing in a kickabout against the press team attracted the interest of 130,000 visitors over a single weekend. Huge number for us at the Evening Post. She offered to put on a football kit herself and start kicking some balls around, but I've declined that up to now. But it does demonstrate the need for more innovative ideas in terms of content generation and an appreciation of a different audience and a new approach in order to capture them. It's up to our politicians to play their part and work with us, I think, to create more engaging content for it's their audience as well as ours, I guess. There's more room online for what I call the drier content of the process of government, because transferring digital content is less reliant on people. Our digital brand also doesn't have quite the same restrictions from a geographical or a pagination perspective as the print product. There's an opportunity to release the more traditional shackles and generate as much content as we want, really. We're already looking at the creation of a Welsh Government channel on our website, taking what's being discussed here directly to our digital audience. Though we're not necessarily offering an open goal, we will be watching, and our politicians can expect to be challenged. But in summary, I think there is an appetite within the regional press, certainly at the Evening Post, to consider our approach to the coverage of national issues. It comes down to the message and the method of delivery, and an acceptance of the need for change if they're going to be effective. As I said, politics doesn't have to be about policy and process. Really, it's about people. Thanks.
You said there that new technology and so on was actually freeing up your reporters from the desk, getting out and about more. That's against the normal story that we hear these days, that journalists are more and more shackled to their desk by increasing demands and fewer resources and so on. So how has that come about? Because that does sound to be different from the kind of narrative we normally hear.
Yeah. Well, we have a reporter app which has been created centrally by the local World team, and that'll be filtered out now to the various sites within our group. Reporters can then download this technology. It's only been made available this week, so quite how it pans out, I think I'll have to pop back and let you all know. But basically, they're able now to write, take pictures, take video, upload it straight to the site, and they can do that remotely. So there's less of a requirement for them to be sat in the office as often as they are currently.
So you're going to be expecting to be out reporting on what's happening in communities?
Yeah, I think, as I say, I mean, stories don't necessarily happen in the newsroom. We get the press releases in the newsroom. But if we're going to be out there representing the communities we serve, then we need to be out there amongst them and talking to them directly. So it does release them from some of the more office-based duties that they have at the moment.
And can I just check the question I asked with Kevin and Holly? How many of your local council meetings do you get reported week in, week out?
We cover as many as we can. We don't get to everyone, that's for sure. We just don't have the
and do you think it makes a difference if you do or you don't? Is it your sense of public duty, or does the community care?
Absolutely, it makes a huge difference. I've only been at the Evening Post a few months now, but during my time in Carmarthen, there were a few councils I identified that we weren't covering. So I sent one reporter to, I think it was to Lampeter, and he came back the next day and he said it was like welcoming royalty, and they were delighted to have a member of the press sat there taking notes. And they just from that meeting, you suddenly were taking calls from councillors and people in Lampeter because they felt you were willing to reach out to them and represent what was going on in their community. So it's critical that we're out there.
And but it wasn't just the councillors who were pleased they were getting reported, it was the community as well.
Yeah, well, don't forget, councillors are the community. These people, they're local councillors, they're also the local butcher, they're the chap who delivers the mail in the morning. These people they're very much part of their community. They also have an interest maybe in local politics, and they devote their time to representing their community, which is great. But it's our job to get out there and promote what's going on.
Great. Okay. Any questions for Jonathan?
Jenny Sims, the NUJ. I have a question not just for Jonathan, but for the three speakers this afternoon.
Can you just take the mic, Jenny, so we can make sure we get it recorded?
Hello, Jenny Sims, NUJ. My question isn't just for Jonathan, but for the three speakers this afternoon. And it is really about employing journalists, qualified, good journalists. And as you've just demonstrated, sending qualified journalists to cover council meetings, courts, it generates quality stories. Whereas if they're not out there, then surely your readership falls. What can you tell us that's positive and optimistic about perhaps continuing to employ good, qualified, quality journalists?
Yeah. You'll be aware, just as I am, that there are, as I've said, fewer jobs for journalists today. We have seen many redundancies within our industry over the last 5 years in particular. And it's difficult to really pin down where we'll end up as an industry. As I say, we are in this period of transformation where we're embracing the benefits of the digital audience, the digital brand. And we are seeing the print product decline. How far that decline goes, I don't know. But we're investigating new revenue streams. Is there an opportunity for newspapers to make more money? With that will come more opportunities for jobs. I think the kind of jobs now within newsrooms as well is going to change. I think there's a need now for more, and I hate to use some of the terminology, but there's a need for more content generators, or as we call them, reporters, to be out there writing stories. And hopefully there'll be an opportunity for us to increase the amount of positions we have available. I'd love to be able to give you a definite answer. I don't think any of us know, to be honest. We're at a moment in time where there is uncertainty over where we'll end up as an industry. But I think there's reason to be positive. But there's many challenges facing us, unquestionably.
Kevin?
Yeah, well, I can give you a positive story, actually, because at the Argus over the summer, starting in July, we're going to be adding pagination to our paper, so that At the moment, our minimum pagination on an early week is 28 pages, which I don't think is good enough, so that's going to move up to 40, and at the same time I'm taking on 2 additional reporters, not filling vacancies. That's 2 reporters on top of our current numbers. And the other point I'd make, I can't talk for other newspapers, but certainly on mine, we only employ qualified, properly trained journalists, a lot of whom I have to say have been through the Cardiff course, which is one of the best in Britain, if not the best. I certainly don't employ anybody who's not been through a proper training course.
Can I just add as well? So I've been back with Local World now at another newspaper group previously, but I've been back about 7 months, and in that time we've not made any journalists redundant, and we've hired, I would think we've hired about 7 or 8, I'm sure, that across the Post Journal and Star. I think we've brought in quite a few people, and there is still belief in the print product. While I say it's in decline in terms of circulation figures, we still believe in it. And to pick up on Kevin's point there, there's a number of different products in development stage now, and the Evening Post should hopefully be launching a new weekend supplement, a new entertainment guide on a Thursday, potentially a travel guide on a Wednesday. So there's a view that we can do more with our print product. We're not necessarily putting all our eggs in the digital basket and cutting the newspapers free. That isn't what I'm saying. It's just about how the paper reinvents itself, if you like, or at least repositions itself within the market to complement the fact that people want their news in a different way. But there's still a belief that the print product can succeed and thrive. It's just how we address that.
Jonathan, I think I'm right in saying that, you know, as you say, you're part of Local World, that your CEO recently said that the group is looking to increase content by about 20%, but will be looking to UGC, user or reader-generated content to make up a lot of that. Yeah. So that supposes, therefore, a different kind or a deeper kind of interactivity and relationship with your readership. It
is. I mean, it's a combination of things, really. Yes, I mean, absolutely. The majority of our content should be produced by qualified professional journalists. There's no 2 ways about that. But it's a fact that user-generated content is also popular. You look at YouTube, you look at Facebook. You know, people are really engaged with these sites, and it's nothing to do with quality news journalism. There is an appetite out there for a different kind of news as well. But that should complement rather than become the major shareholder in terms of our content. Yeah.
Holly, did you want to pick up on this?
I was just going to say something on the training aspect in qualified journalists. It's very important to us that we do have quality journalists. At the Western Telegraph, it can be difficult for us to recruit people who have already got the first level of NCTJ qualifications, which is what we look for. And we do find that we have to train a lot of ours in-house, but that does give us the luxury that a significant number of my journalists are all homegrown Pembrokeshire people. They've been through education, they care about it, their families live in Pembrokeshire, they care passionately, therefore, about everything that they're writing about and about the community that we're in. And then we take them through the training process on the paper. But it's the first paper I've worked on where literally the majority of the staff are Pembrokeshire born and bred and raised, and as I say, that shows in the kind of stories that they're covering and how we cover the stories, because it's our community, it's where we're living.
Okay, other questions? We're thick and fast, so here first and then...
Thanks. Well, I think Jonathan has brought us back to where we should be, and it is about people, and we all get caught up in process, and the paperwork now is more than it's ever been, and process will always take you away from people, and the politicians are there to represent their community. That's their only reason for being there, and their local knowledge to try and make better communities, and it's easy to lose sight of that. You know, and a simple example, and perhaps it's not fair, but when ministers come and speak at conferences, they're so damn busy, they say their bit and they go. So they don't learn anything from the people that are there with the knowledge. And it's that sort of thing that everybody's so damn busy, but are they spending their time doing the right things? And if you build up the trust so that the politicians can contact the newspaper, because to spend hours at a council meeting isn't always the best use of time. But if you can know that you'll have 2 or 3 politicians contact you about the relevant stories, which you can check with other sources, but it's about we can close the democratic deficit if we're working together. So I'm sorry, that's not a question really, although it could be in terms of, you know, how do you think that could work better so that everybody's time is used better and represents local comment better?
I think it is about working together, isn't it? it is about building relationships, and that's true of journalists, and you're absolutely right, it's true of politicians as well. It's important that they do get out in the field, as it were, and meet the people who who've put them in the position where they are, and understand what's going on. I think that is the case for many of our elected members. But the more they engage, I think, with the local newspapers, the easier they'll find it to get their message across. But it's important they recognise that there is a need for what they say to be relevant to the area that newspaper serves, and a greater understanding, just by having conversations maybe with editors or journalists, would really help to move that along.
Okay, got a question here and then another one.
Gareth Morlais. I think that the heritage of your sort of imprints is something that Wales could be proud of. As the balance shifts away from print over time towards, screens, what sort of ways of keeping the things going financially have you got up your sleeve online when people go online to read your stories?
Okay, who wants to pick that one up? David, you can start.
Well, first of all, I'm talking in a purely personal capacity here, so what I'm about to say does not represent at the moment our company policy, but obviously we are pushing the advertising model online, but I have a very firm personal belief that within the next 5 years or so, all newspapers will begin charging for content. My view is that's how we should have started this model in the first place, because we've now got a generation of people who believe that news is free, and it isn't, because news has got a cost, and therefore it should have a value. So, I think that you're already seeing that on an awful lot of news websites across the States. Obviously, we've already seen the Times and the Sunday Times do that. Now, those people who are firmly in the digital camp and the news is free camp will say, well, look at the Times and the Sunday Times, and their unique users have gone from the millions into the hundreds of thousands. My argument would be, and Holly kind of mentioned this when she talked about the type of stories that get the biggest hits, and if I think back to my last editorship, which is of the Evening News in Worcester, our biggest hit while I was there on a news story was about Google Street View highlighting supposedly a dead body in the street. It wasn't, it was a kid playing. And that was picked up by a news aggregator in the States and gave us tens of thousands of hits. But those people aren't our audience. They'll never come back to the Worcester News website. They were interested in that one story. And I think that's what you've got to look at. And my view is that when we reevaluate the online news model, we will find that those people who want our news, and I think in the local media, often what we produce you can't actually find anywhere else. Those people who want it will be prepared to pay a reasonable amount for it, providing that it's easy to pay for, in the same way it's easy to download music from iTunes, etc. And those people will actually be our loyal audience. And that loyal audience becomes more attractive to advertisers.
Holly, presumably you can't expect your Russian readers to pay for pictures of the Beast
I don't
of
think they're
Tenby.
going to pay for pictures of the Beast of Tenby, no. It is obviously something that's looked at all the time. I love newspapers. It's one of the reasons ever since a very young age of 2 or 3, I remember getting told off for screwing up my dad's Telegraph because I obviously couldn't cope with the broadsheet paper. But it's my own views. There are all these websites and web apps, but you're only looking at one story at a time. You're clicking through. I personally prefer the page-turning kind of software, and that's how I view a lot of my newspapers now digitally. And I think more and more we're just going to have to look at everybody wants to consume their information in a slightly different way, and we're going to have to do that through apps, through websites, through page-turning, whatever that might be, as well as the print product, while there's demand for it.
Yeah, in terms of advertising revenue, I can see that there may well be a natural shift among our advertisers, because I think advertisers are becoming more savvy, I guess, to the benefits of advertising online as well. They still probably get the better response out of the print product, which is why predominantly that's where people prefer to be. But there is a greater awareness now of a change in attitudes and a growing audience online as well. And I think the bigger the audience becomes, and the more attractive it becomes to advertisers. So you may well see some of this revenue, shifting almost naturally.
Okay, got a question here, Steve Groves.
I've been talking to a couple of, or quite a few journalists here the last couple of weeks who would have worked at one time in newsrooms like yours and are now working for politicians, special interest groups, charities, who say that quite often they are submitting press releases to newspapers in Wales that go in more or less as they're written, unsubbed, no new intro, no follow-up questions and all the rest of it. Is that necessarily a bad thing? And do you accept that it's happening?
Who wants
to go first? Yeah.
Well, I'll answer it. I mean, I suppose my answer to that would be, if we receive a press release that is extraordinarily badly written, it'll get rewritten. If we receive a press release that is balanced and objective and makes sense, then why waste our resource on doing the same job twice?
How do you know it's balanced, objective and makes sense?
Because that's my job.
No, if somebody writes a press release, they're writing it from the point of view of the organisation they represent.
Yes, of course they are. But, I mean, the reality is that the vast majority of those type of press releases will make nibs, news in briefs in our papers, maybe a couple of paragraphs. And you know, again, my view is that I would rather use my resource creating compelling content than use it on rewriting stuff that, as you quite rightly say, is quite often now written by people who used to work in our newsrooms and therefore are trained and perfectly adequate journalists.
I think it may go in untouched, but it's certainly been read.
Yeah.
So if the news desk has read it and considered it a decent piece of journalism, and again, as Kevin says, I mean, they tend to be on matters that don't necessarily need interrogation or investigation. They're nibs or short stories. And but it'll certainly be read, even if it's not changed. And if it's written by a former journalist, I'd expect it to be of a decent standard anyway. So it may well be that it's fit to go in. Some of them. Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Question in the front here. Could you just wait for the microphone?
Quick question. I just wanted to know, where do you see the local newspaper after 5 or 10 years?
5 or 10 probably. I think we'll still have I'm certain we'll still have newspapers 5 or 10 years time. I think if you're talking about the future of newspapers generally, if we're talking 40, 50 years down the line, we may still have newspapers, but it may be that people, while wanting quality local news journalism, while possibly even wanting to be able to physically turn pages, may want to do that digitally. So will we see the launch of a tablet form of as some papers have done, where you can literally turn the page, but you're holding it on a modern technological device as opposed to that old, outdated print product that they once produced. I don't think newspapers will disappear. I think we just may change how we deliver it.
Anyone else on that?
Well, I mean, how we do things is vastly different today than it was 10 years ago, although the print product still remains the primary thing that we produce. And I don't see in a 5 or 10 year period an end to print products. And I think we need to remember that for a lot of traditional local daily newspapers, the print audience tends to be an older audience. So the gap certainly between print and online will continue to narrow. But I mean, it's worth remembering, I don't think anybody's quoted this stat today, but in terms of local news for the UK as a whole, there are 4 times as many people still who receive their local news at least once a week from print media than do from online media.
We've got in South Wales 2 examples of community websites which have started out on the web and are now looking to move into print. It's the Caerphilly Observer in your area, Kevin, and Port Talbot Magnet in your area, Jonathan. So those community sites clearly see going into print as something which can generate them more advertising income, but can also mean they get taken more seriously by institutions that they're trying to report. I don't know whether this seems a sort of strange circle that's going on there.
Well, possibly, but I think it just demonstrates, as I said, we are in this tunnel of uncertainty, if you like, where we're not quite sure where we'll end up. But it's clear that newspapers are still very relevant. They're not going away anytime soon, and they still have a huge profile and respect in the communities that they serve. So it's natural, I guess, for news websites to want to launch print products as we stand today. I mean, picking up on your point, where would we be 5, 10, 15, 20, 30, 40 years' time? Things may well change, but in the here and now, newspapers are still fantastic products that are loved by a huge amount of people.
Okay, any final questions? We've got one at the back.
When I was a journalist in '99, I'm Johan Bell and I now work for Simon Thomas, Assembly Member for Mid and West Wales. When I was a journalist in '99, it's been touched upon by David Melding, the fact there were people from the Argus and also the South Wales Evening Post who were employed in the Bay reporting on politics, Welsh politics. I was just wondering, you said, obviously, I appreciate that there's finite resources, but have you thought about syndication? In Washington and in the US, they have people who are writing columns that for local press across the states from Washington. And I was just wondering whether the panel thought that might be a good idea in order to try and tackle the democratic deficit.
Interesting question. Could we have syndicated political columns?
We could. My view is that the syndication model in terms of politics and in particular with the Assembly has actually probably been and gone, because what happened when most of us withdrew full-time members of staff from the Assembly was that the Press Association attempted to fill that gap. And then the Press Association also found that it wasn't the most productive use of its staff, and so reduced its resources accordingly. So I personally don't see that as a way forward, because I think it's something that's already been tried and didn't work particularly well.
Is it different if it's an opinion piece, a columnist doing opinion as opposed to straight reporting?
Well, potentially, and we run a number of opinion columns, but I don't know, Jonathan may have a different view to me, but I would much rather be running kind of exclusive opinion columns rather than one that you can pick up in several other newspapers.
Jonathan, presumably syndication doesn't meet your criteria of local relevance.
Absolutely, it's precisely that. It's relevance. Syndicated copy couldn't hope to achieve that, and we deal with our own local areas, and it's important that the people we have are relevant and what they're talking about is relevant. You can't achieve that if it's generic across the copy.
Okay. Matt's question.
Again, a long time ago, well, not that long ago, I worked in newspapers as well, and the syndication model worked then at a Westminster level, where one reporter would work across 2, 3 titles and provide specific locality-based reports to the newspaper, and a lot of copy was covered. So the question there, I suppose, is why doesn't that apply to Assembly politics, Welsh national perspective, and do we really seriously need to consider now crossing that Rubicon of perhaps publicly funding that sort of syndication in order to maintain the local news model in Wales?
I don't know if we do need to take that step. I think we already get a significant amount of copy that we can localise ourselves in-house. It's an interesting one. I personally just don't think it would work from my perspective.
Okay, any final questions before we wrap up? Well, I think it's been a really interesting discussion. Some of the things we've had, I haven't captured everything, but the messages we've heard through the day are, firstly, it's not all bad. Devolution has been a success and continues to evolve and develop and succeed. Welsh media is much better than media in many other parts of the UK. People may be disengaged from institutions, doesn't mean they're disengaged from politics, and so perhaps we shouldn't blame the messenger too much. On the other hand, there have been some quite pointed suggestions that perhaps political issues need to be made more directly relevant to the public rather than the institutions, less of a Punch and Judy show, that policy and process don't sell but people do. We need to simplify the language, explain the institutions better, and perhaps use social media to reach out and interact more. Some practical things about using Wales as a comparison with the rest of the UK, using data to illustrate what's happening in Wales as against the rest of the UK. Practical things like perhaps extending video feeds to local newspapers for websites enabling them to enhance kind of Welsh government channels and so on. Thinking about civic education, as Holly pointed out as well, and bringing particular responsibilities of the Senate to the fore with clear positions and opinions. And finally, there was the thought that perhaps Wales needs authority figures both in the media and in politics to lead the debate and drive the kind of social engagement a bit more. And to do that, we need more frankness, more openness, and maybe a little less PR control. Well, that's all. I'm sure we have lots of opinions about all of them, and there were many other things discussed as well. But I'd like to thank all of our panellists this afternoon, as well as those this morning, and invite David to come up and close the session. But please thank the panellists.
Thank you, Richard, and I think it's been a highly enjoyable day, informative, challenging, and at times a little awkward as a politician sat listening to some of the messages. But that's really what we wanted, and I'm particularly grateful to all the panellists and indeed to you, the audience, for being so engaged and asking some, I think, really apposite questions and making highly relevant comments. If I can just reflect on the morning session first, there's some key messages. We were told quite boldly that London print media is not going to change. They have their own difficulties, and that we need to look elsewhere, particularly the new media. I think Peter Riddell, the former Times correspondent, and some highly committed to political coverage and his involvement in the think tank, clearly really engaged in this issue. But I thought it was quite a hard-edged comment there, and that perhaps we're never going to get Welsh editions of the Telegraph or the Times, and even if we did, that may not be the key audience we would want to engage with. I'm sorry I missed Peter's contribution. I had an engagement I couldn't myself change, as I'd already cancelled it once, but I know it will be on Senedd TV. Incidentally, all our proceedings will be, and I do hope that some of you will access that. But I understand he had some pretty pungent things to say about our debating style, saying kindly that many of the debates are excellent, but that there were issues in some of them. As a presiding officer, I couldn't possibly comment on that. And he did think that AMs weren't always engaged and they were concentrating too much on their computers. Well, I think in '99, the fact we had computers in the chamber was groundbreaking. We had people from all over the world coming to look at that. And now, I suppose, 14 years later, it's probably commonplace to bring portable devices in, but perhaps not have your workstation there. So I'll take that back to my fellow AMs. I'm not sure they'll agree, but I thought it was an interesting comment, as was the suggestion that the presiding officer should make ministers answer questions. I think a lot of AMs would sign up to that. It would make our job as presiding officers a lot tougher, and we wouldn't be very popular with ministers sometimes, though they do often answer the questions very effectively and concisely, but perhaps not always. But then again, they're not always asked terribly straight and fair questions, but I should leave that with you to ponder. And again, I thought it was an important point in terms of the morning session, really, I think, was that critical, helpful advice, but was based on get real, reflect on yourself, see what works, and challenge, and come up with innovative ways to do things better. Peter Riddell said, we need to explain the legislative process and simplify the language. I think that's true throughout democratic institutions, and true at the Westminster level and in Scotland as well. But if we do want to get more people to contribute to our legislative process, then it's got to be more accessible, and we've got to look at ways of improving participation and engagement, because most people wouldn't be terribly calm if they were brought before an assembly committee. No matter how friendly that committee tries to be, it is not what most people are used to, and there are other ways of getting working to get engagement, and indeed that's a current work stream that the presiding officer has commenced in terms of increasing our participation and increasing the resources we devote in the Assembly Commission
to participation. Can I just say, I found the afternoon session particularly valuable and interesting, because I think we were really down to discussing the issues that could lead to better coverage and better cooperation, because at the end of the day, these are the outlets that mean most to us, because they will be covering us on a day-to-day basis, and we want to ensure that your job is made more interesting and easier in terms of getting that important political information that you need, and also that we improve the level of coverage so that we serve the electorate better. And we heard from Kevin that the death of regional media is greatly exaggerated. I think the death of politics is greatly exaggerated. As we were told, there aren't many people who are not interested in what's happening to their A&E services in the local hospital, or if the local education system is being changed. These things are obviously meat and drink to people. They really affect everyday life. And in fact, overall, the audiences are bigger for regional and local news, though the outlets or the manner, the mode is changing. So that's really a key one. I think it was Kevin did ask where were the AMs. Well, this is a working day, so AMs are in committee, but I will be taking some of these messages back. I would say to our visitors that there are a lot of AM support staff here, and I'm sure they was, and in group staff as well, and I'm sure they were sent so that these messages could be relayed. I know all political groups take this subject very seriously, and it is something, I think, for the political groups to look at, because there are resources available to facilitate engagement with the media, and the way we do that has to change, I think, as well. We are a bit Cardiff-centric here, which is something we must always reflect on, and Cardiff geographically is not well placed, really, to be the capital city. We are nearly the most southernmost point of the place I used to live. Barry is actually the most southerly part of Wales. And it is important, I think, that we work very hard to be relevant to West, Mid and North Wales, and that's an important issue. Or even Newport, as that great Newport County fan who is here on my right, and it was rather wonderful, I have to say, to see another Welsh club in. I mean, alas, it was because Wrexham lost, but next year I'm sure Wrexham will be the fourth team to get into the Football League, and Newport County will advance to division, let's hope. So I thought Holly made a very important point on the online media, in that it is important and growing, but you do kind of need to know how to navigate it. And we're looking at our web products constantly to ensure that they can be navigated fairly easily, because typically browsing through a website is not something perhaps that one does as you would through a newspaper sometimes, and then just coming across some story. So I think that was a really important point about how we improve the various products we have and make them more relevant and useful to people. And we were reminded that political content does have a place in local and regional papers. Only there were three factors I think Jonathan looked at: audience, relevance, and resource. And he also said, I think very punctually, as far as the public is concerned, it's not process, sometimes it's not even policy, but it's people. And that's, I think, a marvelous thing to take away, though putting it into practice, of course, is the constant challenge. But, perhaps a concrete example there was look at case studies. And the work Assembly does, and Assembly committees, providing case studies is perhaps a key way to make things relevant. And I thought that was really helpful and something to be taken away. And finally, another Jonathan-ism, because there were quite a few, the South Wales Evening Post is now a website with a newspaper attached. That's quite a thought. But I think what it does teach us is that things change, life changes, democratic politics changes, participatory politics is changing. And if we want to stay where we are and stay the same, we will not serve the public. We don't know all the answers, but I do think we found some this afternoon. So thank you all very much for attending. There will be various products. There's a report. We're on Senedd TV. There's another conference in this series on the 12th of June when we'll be looking at the blogosphere and the like specifically. But can I just finish by thanking Richard and this afternoon's panelists and this morning's, and I know you want to show your appreciation in the normal way. Thank you.